And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, issuesode 17. My name is Bobsy. We're going issue by issue, page by page, theory by theory, panel by panel, riot by virus through Grant Morrison's Cosmic Conspiracy classic, The Invisibles. We are up to issuesode 17 and it is a banger. This might be part one. Going to go for about an hour, see how it goes. Don't want to do a 4-hour marathon session. This one's going to be about this is going to be part one, last for about an hour. Quick note, it's Sunday, the end of midsummer, 2020. I measure, as far as these things go, midsummer from like Bloomsday on the 16th through to the final Sunday of the Glastonbury Festival, which would have been today. So midsummer, she is finishing now. It's the end of June. It's been getting on for 2 months, although I'm still within my monthly calendrical allowance since the last episode. And a lot's gone on. I think we all know that a lot's gone on. The UK lockdown is more or less finished, but the pubs don't open for another week yet. You don't really get a public in the UK, despite their diminished role as gathering points and as points of community sharing. You don't have a public without pubs, so things don't go back to normal until the pubs open. And then even when the pubs open, the coronavirus-related social distancing measures, which are going to be in place, are going to make the pub experience very different. So there is going to be a return of the public soon, but we're not there yet, right? Things are still weird. Things are going to be weird throughout 2020. Everyone just knows that now. It's fine. It's not fine, but it's a given. It's a given. When we got to this issue, right, I was thinking, virus. We're on to issue 17. Look at that cover. We'll get to the cover in a minute. Look at it. It's brilliant. I thought after reading this issue, kind of getting on a couple of months ago now, that we would be the hot take, like the way that the Invisibles is influencing current 2020 reality is in the way that this comic, this issue, and the two subsequent to it, this arc, introduce the concept of virality, of viruses, into the Invisibles kind of narrative. I was wrong. Oh, no, I wasn't. I was half right. That's in it, and obviously, like the way that we're in virus land now, and we're going to be for, like I say, throughout all of 2020, and we have been for a good few months already. But that's not what this issue and the next 3 issues are about, really. The viral thing is there, but what we're really about is the origin of King Mob. And since we have recorded, that's what these 3 issues are. They're King Mob's bit. And since we recorded that last episode, what's been really interesting to note and how it fits in with this here bit of comic, which as we know is a little bit lively and still saying rather a lot to us about how we live our lives in the third decade of the 21st century, sorry. Yeah, nice one. King Mob come back in the past few weeks. Since I first read this, King Mob happened. We're going to talk a reasonable amount about King Mob over the next 3 issuesodes, obviously. We've already talked a bit back right at the start of these Invisibles read-throughs. We've talked quite a bit about what King Mob comes from, what the name means. What I think is the most interesting thing that's been thrown up, so obviously I'm talking about the Black Lives Matter protests. I'm talking about the the capture and I still think holding of the autonomous zone in Seattle on Chapel Hill. Is it Chapel Hill or Capitol Hill? We don't talk about it much in the UK. Hasn't really made it to the media. The thing you need to know about King Mob is it's King Mob. Okay? When it's his time, he's the king. He says what reality is. So that means there's been a lot of people kind of going, so it's fairly obvious to understand, right? That you would go from people being intensely isolated and constrained and constricted in their houses to the opposite of that, which is like large, explosive public mass gatherings. Yeah, that's pretty easy to understand. What a lot of people have struggled with is like how we can go from pandemic, virus. Vectors of infection being the most worrying thing in the world. To these vectors of infection now don't matter next to the required public reckoning with police violence, right? And the linkage there is king mob. Whatever the king says, his decree is absolute. And when it's king mob's time, if he says the vectors of viral transmission don't matter, or even don't exist, they don't exist. Okay, they're not there. And that's why we've had these public gatherings in the UK and all across the US. These, I would note, mask wearing. Enormous protest. The one we had here in Brighton was bigger than anything except for probably as big as an annual Pride parade. Like, it was ginormous. There was easily, there was a lot of people, many more than were out for the Extinction Rebellion protests in 2018-19. And there doesn't appear to have been a commensurate spike in infections since those mass gatherings, because King Mob, whose time it was at that point and whose power is waning somewhat, but he's still in the air, said that those vectors didn't matter, that the systemic racism and police brutality were dangerous, and that the virus, or the transmission of the virus, wasn't, and thus it became, right. It's weird, but it happened. And that excuse me, that kind of entering into the period of King Mob's rule, which, as I say, kind of mapped very well to like Midsummer, happened when we started reading the Invisbles about King Mob, when he became the star of the show again. Okay, so the Invisbles is still shaping reality. Looking ahead for the next couple of months, using what I can broadly remember the next couple of issues of this are about, and how this comic kind of influences or provides at least a very useful window into real reality out there. I would say, if I was one of the chief organisers of a BLM protest, or especially if I was holding territory in an American city, I wouldn't be surprised to get strapped to a chair and tortured by cops. Obviously, I don't want that to happen. The people there have my very best wishes, but there's a lot of people getting tied to chairs and tortured in these issues too. Okay, so like King Mob has his puissance, and he has his coolness, he has his influence, and his ability to make the world be what he says it is. But he also gets tied to a chair and tortured. So Godspeed, actually, to everybody out there. Yeah, lot more that could potentially be said there, but I think we'll just leave it at that, because I don't want to be sitting here ranting like a lunatic. Well, not that fast, obviously, but yeah, there are spirals within spirals. There are fractal points of contention and discourse and debate which are there to be had, a bit like on this here cover by Sean Phillips. It's an absolute banger of a comic book cover. Not entirely, the style isn't entirely radical for the time. There was a lot of this sort of retro, but also kind of retro contemporary psychedelic revival artwork, abroad at the time, particularly within the comic scene. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about how the aesthetics of the 60s were highly influential upon the sort of young creatives of the period. This issue 17 of the Invisbles cover could just be a cover of a British comic called Revolver, which was like an intensely weird and psychedelic comic, put out by a mainstream publisher and available in provincial bookshops all over the UK and elsewhere. Bookshops, newsagents, you can buy it where you bought your daily paper, all over the UK. So this aesthetic itself isn't that unusual for the time, but it is extremely striking. That cover, that comic there, that gets bought, doesn't it? That's just cool. If you look closely at it now, you can see this kind of so this background is obviously like computer generated, which is very exciting for the time, very novel, and you can see it sort of resolving or dying, if you like, or conversely generating from this black hole artifact here. It's very sort of easy to not see that black hole, but it's definitely there. The printing on this issue is, of course, fairly primitive. So the blockiness of these fractal patterns here, you can see where they stop, right? You can. The whole point of a fractal is that it keeps getting deeper and deeper. But obviously, a printing press can't do that. So it stops, and basically uh, that point of like aesthetic breakage where the kind of the maths of the fractal meets the practicalities of a late 20th century printing press. Like I don't know about you, but like that kind of like thin line, that's where my aesthetic is. That's what I like. uh that's it for me. The kind of the invisible point of contact between math and reality is on this page, and I like it. Yeah. Maybe you like it too. We've got a picture of Gideon Stargrave here, who looks a little bit like King Mob, but with hair, and straight out in the open. I've got an interest here, but like hair loss is a theme for the next 3 months, right? For the next three issue-sodes. He's got this amusing vibrator, like sex toy gun thing here. He's got a kind of a Nehru jacket, I think we would try to call that. A car coat, perhaps. He's got a little kind of Edwardian ruff. He's got cool guy shades. He's got like a 60s, or actually it's more like an early 70s, isn't it? Feather cut. This is like, and this is before Austin Powers came out, right? Although you don't need to be a genius to see the kind of like the shared set of influences across them. But this is and this is ridiculous too, right? This kind of like macho cool guy, Edwardian future dandy thing is ridiculous, and the Austin Powers thing kind of, who also Austin Powers made a comeback this month as well. It is easy to take the mickey out of in the way that Austin Powers did, and deservedly so. But this is just cool. It's just cool. It's a good cover. It's a good cover, Lynn. It's just good. It's just a good cover. And all of the kind of cringe of it, all of the, um, the kind of the slightly silly, hyper psychedelic macho cool guy wish fulfillment stuff. Who gives a fuck? It's really cool. And there you go. Yeah. Part 1 of 3. Gideon Stargrave in Entropy in the UK. You don't need to be a genius to spot the Moorcock and sort of McLaren. Let's not be harsh there. We'll call it a Moorcock Leiden influence there. Sex Pistols and Jerry Cornelius. Obviously, we'll be talking about Jerry Cornelius quite a lot. Over the page, let's get into it. Over the page. Before we actually start the issue, we have to look at our advert. This is a very boring advert for a Sandman collection. So this is the point where we get to talk about Neil Gaiman again. I don't really want to. Quickly, just to say this. So this is an advert for a trade paperback collecting 6 issues of Neil Gaiman Sandman comic. This one is called The Dream Country. It's the one with the Shakespeare one in it. So this is the best one. If you're going to get any Sandman comics, get this one. But look at how boring the advert is. Tiny, kind of badly printed black and white something there, and then a very, very serious explanation about why you should all rush out and buy Neil's very clever comic. Gaiman made a dick of himself during the pandemic, the twat, and that's all we'll say. Oh, that was easier. That was easier than I thought. But yeah, if you're going to get a Sandman comic, get that one. It's good. Okay, over the page, and we are right into it. We're right into it. Difficult to kind of remember how much of a what this scene would have been when first reading it. Speedboat chase on the Thames is like the walking in on your parents having sex of action, of action scenes. Yeah. Uh, Speedboat ride on the Thames, which is what we got here. Um, what's the Bond one? I think it's is it Tomorrow Never Dies? No, it's not Tomorrow Never Dies. I should look this up. I should look this up myself. Pierce Brosnan, speedboat ride on the Thames. He kind of jumps. He gets a speedboat out of the MI5, 6, whatever building, and has a cool speedboat chase on the Thames, which ends up on the Millennium Dome. It couldn't possibly be more 90s, and nor could it possibly be anything other than like a real world reflection of which this is the platonic ideal. Yeah. So Bond, with his kind of like crap 90s, not crap, with his like grey business suits, this guy here is the kind of is like the repressed Austin Powers grooviness that the Pierce Brosnan Bond, and indeed all of the Bonds, can't quite do, right? Doesn't have the freedom to be. So if Bond was as cool as he could be, he'd be this cool, right? And this scene on the Thames wouldn't just be him driving high-tech killer speedboats. He would. Oh, okay, actually, let's not get too far into that. Okay, so there's music coming from somewhere. Pink Floyd post Syd. The sky's unraveling into super speed threads as window pane acid explodes into the 8 brains of Gideon Stargrave and the lovely Jenny Shaw. Cold thrill of Thames spray. High velocity. Don't shoot until you see the weird luminous blues of their eyes. Hope I die before I get out, baby. Dodgy bit coming up. Jenny, 15, proud possess 15. That's the dodgy bit. Sorry, I skipped over it. That's the dodgy bit. Proud possessor of the Miss Evelyn Cruikshank Jr. Blah, blah, blah. Evelyn Cruikshank is like a Tory historian, basically. So I'm not sure why she's invoked there. I have theories as to why you'd invoke like a leading historian of high Toryism on the first page of this comic for anarchists. Remember, but let's not go there yet. There's plenty of time for all of that. So what's really dodgy here is that you've got a sexy schoolgirl, and you can see her knickers, and it says she's 15. It's like at the time we thought that was awesome, Japes, and now we don't. And it's interesting, right? So that kind of loss of like, oh come on, of course you'd stick a 15-year-old girl's knickers in your comic, because that's artistic freedom. I think the fact that we don't necessarily think we don't think that would be like acceptable level of artistic freedom probably maps to a higher level of freedom, I would think. I know that sounds kind of paradoxical, but basically what I'm saying is I think it's a good thing that comics would be, not just comics obviously, but like, pop culture products would be a little bit more reticent about sexualizing and let's say hypersexualizing 15-year-old girls, frankly. I think you wouldn't get this panel now, and I think that's good, and I think it actually represents, despite like no one's despite the censorship, oh god, I just wanted to draw a sexy 15-year-old. There are real 15-year-olds whose freedom to not be predated upon by the male gaze, too core, should we say? Oh, I need to mention that actually. Is good and actually represents a net gain for freedom here on planet Earth. Okay, so the fact that this is a bit or wrong now, lean into it. It's good. That feeling of being aware that it's wrong means that you and we are growing. Okay, so don't be prudish about the prudishness here. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say, going back into the stuff about King Mob and the stuff that happened in June. And I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet too much here, and I don't feel like I need to make the case that that this read through ongoing of the Invisibles has got very clear echoes in our current lived 2020 reality. I've satisfied myself as to that quite happily. Just want you to reflect upon the fact that I've been saying for quite a little while in previous episodes that statues aren't statues. Statues aren't just statues. Uh, the way that the protests manifested, if you're watching this in the far future and you're not dead, good luck, well done. The BLM protests of June 2020 in all over the world, kind of, or at least all over the West, had this kind of like iconoclastic uh, point of contention to them around getting rid of statues of bad people in history who kind of were unjustly being commemorated in our cities and monuments. Because, as I've been saying, statues aren't statues. The reason that the word gaze triggered my memory of that is because statues can see, right? I know you think that sounds crazy, but it's true. And the fact that it's true is why people felt that it was important to get rid of these statues, because they don't like being looked at. The Albert Pike one, if you're like a conspiracy person, the fact that they tore down the Albert Pike statue, that's a game changer. Like whatever you think is going on sort of upstairs, for the Albert Pike statue to not be there anymore is highly significant. Ditto hasn't come down yet, and I think we should really keep a close eye on when, particularly, and kind of how it does come down. But the Cecil Rhodes statue in Oxford, that has been agreed to be taken down during this period, and that represents an almighty symbolic shift. And I don't have a firm line on whether symbolic and material, which one comes first. In fact, I think the position is between the two of them is dynamic. And so sometimes the symbolic is upstream of material reality, and sometimes material reality is upstream of the symbolic, which is to say that sometimes you do a change in the real world first, and sometimes you do a change in the symbol system first, if you want to have, like reflective effects happening on the other pole, right? I'm sorry, that sounds crazy, but the world is a crazy place, okay? Sometimes you have to change the symbol in order to change the real world. Sometimes you have to change the real world in order to change the symbol. Whether or not this, say, the Cecil Rhodes statue coming down, which is huge, it's huge. Whether it coming down reflects a material change or merely a symbolic change, which will go on to cause a material change, I don't know. But it's really significant. It basically marks a huge shift in power in like the Anglosphere, if you like all of the New World Order stuff, which all of this conspiracy monarchy is about, basically rolls back to Albert Pike and Cecil Rhodes, and for their statues to have been destroyed in this latest period of rule by King Mob, I don't know what it means, but it means something significant is happening. Like I say, upstairs. Okay. Sorry for sounding mad, but it's the way it is. So what's going on here? This is weird, isn't it? There's speedboats and helicopters fighting on the Thames. There's this kind of weird, kind of like courier font typed out narration. There's a sexy schoolgirl who we haven't seen before. There's this guy here who, the hair is obviously very important, but he looks like King Mob. No, he does. The art's very different to how we've seen it before. We've got Tower Bridge happening here. We've got beyond Tower Bridge, we've got a lot of cranes building something. I think I think the thing they were building was the Millennium Dome, actually. Hence the Bond Thames speedboat battle ending there, right? There's this excellent description of what Gideon Star. This guy isn't King Mob; it's Gideon Stargrave. He's introduced by having all of his clothing read out. His clothing described, which I'll read out. Gideon Stargrave was wearing mirrored Ray-Ban shades, a purple crushed velvet frock coat with matching bell-bottom trousers, a lemon-frilled shirt from Mr. Fish, paisley underpants from Marks and Spencer's, and high-heeled Chelsea boots from Shelley's Shoes. Wizard praying old bean, bang! The baddie speedboat explodes. It's all just explosions and helicopters and sexy schoolgirls and cool spies and Tower Bridge and the Thames, and it's impossible to describe how like excellent this phantasmagoria of stuff happening in your comic is all of a sudden, and it's all being done with primarily, there's not a huge amount of like detail given it, like the explosion is background. The majority of the top panel is water. Most of the page is being taken up with these narrative captions. The reality, the storytelling reality that we're used to having in the Invisbles, is not on this page. This is a very drastic, sudden shift. Where the hell are we, in other words? So there's a. Oh yeah, it says that's not an M16 that she's carrying, although it says that she is. St. Hilary, I mean, is that relevant? For some reason, it's in bold here. There was a St. Hilary's in Kent, but it wasn't like a particularly, there's a St. Hilary's school like up in Cheshire, which is more of like the kind of St. Trinian's-esque school that we're meant to be thinking of when we see this anarchic schoolgirl character. It's interesting, right? There's this we're gonna see this in the next 3 issues a lot, is that there are a huge amount of like signifiers being zapped at you throughout the course of these 3 issues. Some of the, like, any of them can be highly important if you want them to, if you go digging and looking into them. This whole thing is honeycombed with rabbit holes, like these fractal abysses on the cover. This kind of like fractal style of storytelling, whereby every little detail is a prod to send you off into another universe, another wormhole, is really intensely happening in the storytelling style of these 3 issues. And it is a really interesting and exciting way of telling a story. But I don't think we've got time to go down every single one. And I don't think it would be terribly valuable to do it either. But knock yourself out. Look into Saint-Hilaire, French saint. What do we know about French saints, guys, in the Invisbles? Saint Hilary, Saint-Hilaire here. Who's this Gideon Stargrave? There's music coming from somewhere. Doppler shifting crazily. You can look into Mr. Doppler and how the fuck he managed to come up with his theory of like time dilation at the speed of light, kind of thing. Clever guy, but also it's not coming from just your brain, is it? London's aflame, going down like the Titanic into the void of chaos. It's the second law of thermodynamics, honey. Everything tends towards disorder. I mean, if you were to come to me and say, look, the secret of the Invisbles is in this page, I agree. But we're not going to unlock it here. There's too much to be getting on with, because I've been going for half an hour already, and I'm still only on page 1, which actually isn't bad by my standards. But Gideon Stargrave, who's this? Why does he look like him? Okay, over the page. Look at that. We've got our splash page. It doesn't have the credits on it though, does it? I don't know where the credits are. Are they on the final page? I don't know where they are. Oh, maybe they're here. Oh yeah, no, I know. Okay, they're in a couple of pages. So that's like our first splash page. We've got another one in a bit. Oh, look at this. I mean, so we've got our Jamie Hewlett flowers over a Union Jack background. We've got this very suggestive and quite obviously sort of phallic Big Ben tower here. What's it called? It's one of those ones where it's like, it's not Big Ben. Big Ben is the name of the bell. So what's this? This is like St. Michael's Tower or something stupid like that, isn't it? I'll look that up. But again, too much symbolism happening here. Psychedelic flowers, Union Jack, Mr. Fish Lemon shirt, sci-fi gun, kind of horrible, like St. Paul's Cathedral in the background, horrible, which is not obviously where it would be in relation to the Palace of Westminster. Horrible purple suit that nevertheless somehow looks good. Lots of luscious locks. Gideon Stargrave in Entropy in the UK. Highly exciting 60s analog psychedelic Gideon Stargrave, and then 80s, 90s digital rendered, not rendered, but like digital style lettering for the name of the chapter, following this very sort of like, traditional Britpop mod thing, red, white, and blue malarkey. This Union Jack is totally wrong, obviously. These big corners of blue up here don't exist on the actual, the stripes aren't right. But it looks great. Looks great, doesn't it? Doesn't it look great? Yeah, and these flowers are my favourite bit. I mentioned Revolver a minute ago. This is like, there's like a thing happening in comics at the time here, and in a way, that this issue is a bit vampiric, and it kind of it drags those. It sucks a lot of, like, it relies on this psychedelic comics movement, in which Morrison had played his part. He wasn't just like nicking it off other people. It kind of like, not like sucks it dry and kills it off, but it's definitely like transplanting it for its own sake, right? There's like, so I talked a lot in the last issue about like the construction of 90s reality, and not really 90s reality, but like the British reality that was being built in the 90s to take us forward into the 21st century. Yeah. And how that had really weird resonances with Britain's imperial past. That's what's happening on this page. Yeah. That's like a poster for the whole thing that I'm talking about. The way that this kind of like liberatory promise of grooviness here is pinned with the Union Jack, Big Ben, and St. Paul's as like these points kind of holding it in place. So like the illusion of grooviness, kind of with these incredibly ominous symbols of oppression surrounding him, right? All rendered in this really kind of cutesy, delightful color palette. It's it should make you think, actually. Like, you should feel a bit uncomfortable with the sheer awesomeness of this splash page, because you're being seduced. Yeah. And your seductor, is that a word? Yeah, seducer. Seducer is probably better, isn't it? Why would they, like, are you sure they've got your best interests at heart? Okay. Yeah. Chapter 2, my boyfriend taught me bionic sex. So we've got more 15-year-old schoolgirl knickers. She's been killed here, sacrificed today. There's this excellent, she says, she did just say here, hope I die before I get old, baby. Over the page, you skip this kind of like, this like guitar lick here, and then we're into the second page of our speedboat battle on the Thames. The young girl dies, her face kind of disappears, replaced by this highly detailed sort of just like blondness. Jenny orgasms as she dies. Nice detail, thanks, guys. It's just well Savile, right? It's like Savile Row, yeah. Come on, God, I think I've just noticed that. Okay, it doesn't actually say Savile Row on the previous page, and I thought I'd invented it in my head that it had. Ooh, okay, that was lucky, because like having a Savile reference here would have been too much. Nevertheless, this bit is well Savile. Jenny orgasms as she dies. Like, he probably got his suit from Savile Row, right? Jenny orgasms as she dies. Airbursts of blood like liquid fireworks. Slow motion plasma, neutrophils, lymphocytes, several 100 million red cells, rich in hemoglobin shimmering in the sunlight. Type O, common as muck. It's great narration, and it's kind of, as much as it's a pastiche, obviously, a pastiche of what we haven't quite got to yet, but we will. And this weird emphasis on blood. Yeah. These are all things that like are not necessarily terribly relevant to this issue, but are like super relevant to the conceptual framework and the kind of the monster's jaws that holds the Invisibles in it, right? Christ, wishes can come true. This bloke here with his stupid hair and his ugly suit that looks cool is a dickhead. We're learning this very quickly. The Magna are closing in. Raggedy Crow Men. Magna. Sounds a bit like MAGA, but we're not going to go there. The Magna are closing in. Raggedy Crow Men from the anti-clock world. Helicopter blades chattering like a speed freak on overdrive. Bullets chop merrily through the speedboat's engine. Things are looking bleak. Bloody hell. I wonder if I left the gas on at home. There's music coming from somewhere. Waves of pain. It's getting hard to breathe. Music. Love the way you've got like the helicopter closing in and the reflection of his sun shades. Boom! Barbalith appears. He's sure it's the Floyd. Pain comes flooding in. Gideon Stargrave sets the controls for the heart of the sun. So the music that's been coming in is set the controls for the heart of the sun. This is the post-Syd Pink Floyd track that he's been talking about. It's kind of like an early post-Syd track, so it's lost some of the kind of the charm that the Syd Barrett era Pink Floyd has. It's a cool tune though, but it does have but it's very phallic. Yeah, it's very linear. Set the controls to the heart of the sun. Obviously, it's about solar penis worship, and the kind of the line of the song is just pointing in a singular upward straight line, which is one kind of interpretation for the psychedelic experience you can have, but not, in my view, psychedelic experiences go woo and they zoom in and out. They don't go upwards at 45 degrees to use another psychedelic music reference. They wibble and wobble and bounce in and out of height and loath. Yeah. But nevertheless, this guy, Gideon Stargrave, has got some connection to our Barbalith. The thing that we know is like the kind of the symbolic kind of homeworld guardian presence of the Invisibles and the Invisible Project to a degree, right? And then there's Ace panel as things kind of melt and the hair and the kind of coming to consciousness and the way that this face is kind of forming itself out of this red blankness that's the heart of the sun. King Mob. I've been waiting for this for a long time. I do hope you're ready for a little chat. Splash page. Oh, that's great. We can talk about the art in a second, finally. We're on to our second splash page. So the arc is Entropy in the UK. The chapter of the arc is Dandy, part 1. Splash page, King Mob naked, tied to a chair. Like not a nice chair, an interrogation chair, let's call it. A dentist chair, if you're feeling very sort of charitable. But my dentist's chair doesn't have manacles on it and stuff. It's a torture chair. It's a torture chair. And we get our credits. Grant Morrison, writer. Phil Jimenez, penciler. John Stokes, inker. Daniel Votso, colours and separations. Clem Robbins, the letterer. Julie Rottenberg, the associate editor. Stuart Moore, the editor. And the Invisibles were created by Grant Morrison. So there's some really good details here. Would you remember the last time we saw King Mob? He'd been shot by Brody in the stomach. So that's what this is. He's got these interesting looking. He's a horrible mess. He's all beaten and battered and bruised, but he's also got these kind of something a bit more than that. And it's great the way the picture doesn't make too much of these details yet, but does have them all in place for later. Because that's just how Phil Jimenez and John Stokes, our new artists for the next 3 issues, roll. You can kind of see his cock. You can see the shadow of his cock there, or maybe just his ball sack. It's his ball sack, isn't it? You remember the sigil that we talked about in the previous issue, and the attempts to make the Invisibles not get cancelled and not just die off and be an X-comic. Like I say, the main thing that happens to make that happen to make the sigil work was Grant Morrison getting the Justice League gig. Another one was getting Phil Jimenez and John Stokes on, basically. I don't know if Stokes was his inker, but Phil Jimenez himself was a pretty successful. He was kind of up and coming, but he was a successful superhero artist and had a solid following already. I think he'd been doing Green Lantern or something. But he was there was a lot of superhero fans who you could convince who wouldn't dream of buying the Invisibles normally, but would because they liked Phil Jimenez's artwork. So it was kind of and that's one of like the incremental steps, the smart editorial decisions, which kind of allowed the comic to kind of get its head above the cancellation ocean. Phil Jimenez, yeah, like he probably took a pay cut here to do this issue. He probably got paid less to do these issues than he would have to do more issues of Green Lantern, for instance. But Phil Jimenez is a pretty righteous dude, basically, and he was a fan of Grant Morrison's Animal Man, I think, and was kind of keen to work on with Grant Morrison because he recognised his talent and was like, yeah, put me on it. So he does these. He steps in for these 3 issues. He's the first I think he's American. If he's not, and then I've got that wrong. Then I apologise. But he's the first superstar American artist to work on the Invisibles. He's our 7th or whatever chief penciler for within less than 18 months of the comic, which is, like I said last time, a huge amount of different visual visions to have running the comic at this stage. And you can see, I mean, if you can't, you've already been able to see because we're 3 pages in, but the art's fantastic. It's like the artists on the Invisibles have been of really high quality so far, or however many of them. But none of them have been as immediately easy on the eye as Phil Jimenez, inked by John Stokes, right? It's obviously beautiful and brilliant and attractive and like easy to get into. Whereas you had to maybe work a little bit. You had to kind of have a decent eye in order to sort of see the charms of some of the previous artists. You don't have to. It's obviously just beautiful and brilliant. Quick note on that, actually. So we've got Phil Jimenez is the penciler and John Stokes is the inker. My understanding is that some of the pages in these issues were actually penciled by John Stokes too. Maybe when we get to them, I think not in the next 2 issues. I mean, when we get to them, maybe it's even kind of maybe the credits will kind of bother to mention them, but I'm not fast enough to keep track of whether it's Stokes or Jimenez doing the pencils or the inks at any given point. Suffice it to say, being like, oh, actually, it's the inker who makes it good, is a very true thing to say, and also maximum nerd comic shit, which normal people don't and shouldn't care about. What we are going to say right off the top is that the art in these next 3 issues is brilliant. It's done by Phil Jimenez and John Stokes. The division of labour between the two isn't terribly clear. I'm not interested in it. I'm going to probably revert to saying Jimenez as being the artist here. That's merely shorthand for convenience. And when I say that, you should bear in mind that John Stokes is playing a hugely important part in making this art look as good as it does. So this is art that's been very much produced in partnership, and that's even before you get to the colours and the letters, obviously, by Robbins and Votzo, who are doing their normal excellent job. But yeah, I'm going to say Jimenez. I mean Jimenez and Stokes. You could see by just like the fineness of the line that's used in these pages that the inker is playing an incredibly important role to sort of pick out these fine details. So it's a Jimenez Stokes joint. I'm just not going to say that. I'm just going to say Jimenez. Okay. But the art's amazing. It's really good. He's got as well as just like all the aesthetics and stuff. Like the storytelling's good. Like just look at King Mob's face. He's obviously beaten up to fuck, but there's this kind of like reptilian sort of like not passivity, but just like stoicism on his facial expression here. And although he's really beaten up and he's strapped to a torture chair, he still looks really dangerous. And indeed, we're going to learn, right? Because this is kind of, we're going to cover his origin story in these next 3 issues. Over the page, we've got our first ad break. It's an advert for Doom, which is like the original shoot 'em up game, yeah? I lived at the time, no, actually, was it this time or was it a few, would have been. So basically within a few months of this comic coming out, I would have moved in to a house in London with a lovely guy called Tim, who was one of Europe's Doom champions. And this is like when online, and he would play with people all over the world. This is when online gaming was incredibly new, and you needed to kind of I was at university, and he needed the decent internet that they had. Well, we didn't have internet in the house at all. He needed the decent internet that they had at the university computer science lab, to be able to play Doom online with people in America and Japan and stuff. And he was one of the best in Europe at it, apparently, at the time. So he used to say. Lovely chap. Hope he's doing well. This is like, I think this advert is meant to look like celluloid, as you can see from the little bits on the side here. I can't remember what those are called in the real world. And the strip of celluloid is obviously being kind of mirrored in the strip of an ammo belt chain. Because was that right? Doom was like the big gun in Doom was called the chain gun or something because it was like chain fed. Is that right? I never really played it. But Doom was like the first kind of awesome, huge shoot 'em up, first person perspective game. Kind of, you probably know much more about this than I do. Kind of a significant kind of cultural moment and evolution in computer gaming's popularity. The copy on the ad is quite interesting. Bloodthirsty demons from hell. God, yeah, because they're obviously trying to make you go. They're obviously trying to make you think. Games look as good as and are as much fun as movies, and as kind of as grown up as, right? That's what they're going with here. So they're trying to sort of create the feel of like a movie trailer from the period on a single page of advert. I mean, the photography on these like shells is great. It's like, although it's a bit dark, it's a really well designed advert. This, and the copy's hilarious. Bloodthirsty demons from hell, gut splattered hallways, a big ass nasty gun in your hand. Life is good. It's just like it's very like, not only is like bloodthirsty demons from hell, gut splattered hallways, a big ass nasty gun in your hand, life is good. Not only is that just what's going to happen in a few issues time, spoilers, in this story arc, but it does kind of sum up the pleasures of like shoot 'em up gaming very well, doesn't it? And then it has this there's this weird sort of like the typeface and stuff is like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a bit sort of churchy, yeah. There's a kind of like an attempt to kind of tie into like a gothic kind of grandeur here, and indeed to and it's something I've talked about a lot in these podcasts, isn't it? Is like how our digital realities do the work of replace, in some sense, the religious spaces that we've had in the past, right? It's like the new transcendent reality making is done through digital technology, and it's got demons and violence in it. Sadly, it's the kind of killing that makes life worth living. It's Doom in its original entirety, along with the all-new demented episode 4, Thy Flesh Consumed. It's called Ultimate Doom. It's the kind of killing that makes life worth living. Also, yeah, it looks like it's being advertised in like the kind of the cool way that movies and records would have at the time. Interesting to see gaming as an alternative kind of cultural mode being pushed. Oh, over the page, we take our trip to Sam Goody Music Land. We like these ones, don't we? Great design on this advert this time. It changes. They're more often good than bad, but the colours and the kind of the sense of like light and whatnot in the design of this advert, it looks, it's not a million miles away from that, or indeed from that, is it? So that and that, they're aesthetic bedfellows, aren't they? The records that we had this week is the Amps by the Amps. Sorry, Pacer by the Amps. The Amps are basically the Breeders, right? Basically, it's Kim Deal's band. I would go so far as to say that this record is a gem, an absolute banger. Not banger's not the right word, but it's a brilliant record. Really, really good, like lo-fi indie alt rock record. Like really, really good. The penultimate track on there called like "It's a Girl." Is it called "It's a Girl" or "She's a Girl"? I can't remember. You'd think that for such a good song, I'd be able to remember the name of the song, but it's the penultimate track on this album. It's called "It's a Girl, She's a Girl." Uh, it's literally one of the greatest pop songs of all time. It's just 2 minutes of absolute perfection, and I like it very, very much. Yeah, it's a good record. Check it out. On the other hand, this is an advert for the album Nuisance by Menswe. The graphics on that are very terrible. I don't know why they went with it for the cover, because the band were better looking than that cover would suggest. Uh, I used to love Menswe. I used to love them so much. I went to see them live loads when before their first album came out, really. In Exeter, I saw them once, and I think I saw them in Bristol once. They were. Was I being in love with them? Maybe. Uh, Cute boys in suits, right? I was a cute boy. I like wearing suits. Menswear were the band for me. Okay. Uh, I like them a lot. I have posters on my wall of them. I went to see them live a lot. I would get dressed up to go to their shows. They were, they were 90s mods in all of the ways that I wanted to be. They were the band for me, Menswear. I hadn't listened to their album for a long time, and then I went and listened to it as part of my research for this here issuesode. This record is, with the greatest will in the world, fucking rubbish. It is horribly overproduced. The songs are terrible. The kind of the production on it, the way they pull out these tricks to kind of convince you that these really bad indie pop like trudgers are worth listening to, is entirely unconvincing. There's their famous hit is like a kind of a weirdo new wave pastiche called Daydreamer. That's on the album. Still like just kind of like a sort of a bizarre choice for like a pop single, to the point where it's pretty interesting. They've got another track called Being Brave, which is like this kind of like swooping ballad, which is the only one where the kind of this excess of like Britpop strings and like orchestration makes any sense, and it's not a terrible song. And then there's a hidden track, which I'd forgotten about. Remember that hidden tracks? Basically, the album stops, and then there's a song at the end. It was just like this really sort of shit way of using, um, the limits, and let's be honest, they were limits of CD technology, compact disc technology. And I can't remember what that's called, but it's this kind of like interesting sort of waltz number. Basically, being very generous, there are like 3 tracks on this like 12-track album, which point to maybe Menswear having had the kernel of an interesting band in them. If they'd lent into this kind of like weirdo pop, baroque, not baroque, that's not the right word. This kind of like weirdo, like cartoon new wave pop. that you can hear on Daydreamer and the hidden track one, whatever it's called, the waltzy one. If they'd have put out an album of songs like that, if they were sort of had been brave enough to do that, or had indeed had the kind of the songwriting ability to do it, they might not be the kind of the sort of punchline to a joke of the 90s Britpop band that they are now. But this album is terrible, and their reputation as being like a very bad band is sadly borne out by the majority of this record. And they never really made another record. I mean, they did, but they kind of didn't. It's complicated and boring. Um, I love them so much. Honestly, I really had to steel myself to listen to the record because I knew I would be embarrassed for my younger self, and indeed I was. So I put myself through quite a lot for you here, dear viewers. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't regret having liked them because, frankly, they gave me the courage to wear suits at a time when that was not the done thing for a 17-year-old boy in Somerset, and I looked fucking good while I was wearing them. Thanks, and thanks to the band for giving me the bravery to do that, the courage. But this is a terrible record, which I listened to a lot when I was when was this? 1995. I was like 17. Uh, yeah, awful album. Don't listen to yeah, shame. There's maybe like if you're very generous and have a very sort of particular perspective and ignore a massive amount of dross, um, there was the potential for um, Menswe to have maybe been an interesting like cartoon art pop band, and they didn't become that at all. It's a shame because the version of Menswe in my head is much better than the version of Menswe in the world. Okay, over the page, we're into it, right? So this coalescing face here we see belongs to he's biggity back. It's Sir Miles, everybody's favourite baddie from the Invisbles. Um, he is being scary. He's trying to intimidate King Mob. If you remember, uh, back in like issue 12, was it? You know, the one with the royal monsters, the one with the creepy royal monstrosity in Glamis Castle. Uh, do I mean Glamis Castle? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so Miles has a line about how he had a dream about how he had King Mob strapped to a chair with a blowtorch in his hand, and basically his dream has come true. He's got King Mob exactly where he wants him, right? And Sir Miles is being very smug and villainous about it, and he's doing so by reading. Um, he's reading to freak King Mob out. He's reading to him from the torture manual that he's kind of going to use. Don't just cut off his ear. Don't just cut off his ear. Slice away little bits at a time. You can do the same with his nose, his eyelids, and his lips. Facial mutilation can be very psychologically devastating. Or how about this? If you're going to gouge an eye, do it slowly, taking care not to damage the optic nerve. Then you can leave the eyeball hanging on his cheek, still functioning. His brain will still receive the vision information, but will be unable to turn away or close eyelids as, for example, you mutilate his genitals. And then he tells us what the book is called, Physical Interrogation Techniques by Crucia. It's the standard text here. I'm rather hoping you'll force me to resort to surgical instruments. Physical Interrogation Techniques by Crucia is a real book. Um, uh, but I don't think it's a real like interrogation manual. It was put out by the company Loom Panics, who were like a libertarian stroke transgressive sort of anarcho punk publisher based in I'm gonna get this wrong, like Rhode Island or somewhere in the States, maybe, or do I mean that Providence, that kind of way? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's more like Pacific Northwesty kind of territory. Um, but they were like, yeah, they were like, they would put out loads of books about drugs and transgressive sexual and cultural practices and physical interrogation techniques by Crucia. Obviously, Crucia. I think it's like Richard Crucia. It means like Richard Crucia is obviously like a pun. It's meant to mean like Dick Crusher, right? Uh, Basically, like physical interrogation techniques is an S&M fantasy book that's pretending to be uh, like an actual torture manual. So like, uh, it's like it's a sex book, Lynn. Uh, I think Grant Morrison is probably in on that joke because um, a lot of the stuff that he's pulling from connects very like a lot of that San Diego fetish scene stuff is quite closely allied to the Loom Panic publishing milieu, right? Uh, yeah, it's kind of I guess these kind of publishing houses have been sort of replaced by the internet, but then they've kind of were replaced by the. That's probably something that was true about 10 years ago, and since then, they've probably gone back to selling people physical books because that's nice to have, isn't it? A physical book. Um, but yeah, that's what's going on here. Uh, so this is a little nod to the California, California. I don't know why I said that. To like the American kind of like um, underground transgressive publishing scene that Invisbles is kind of like doing the mainstream version of, right? And obviously, Dick Crusher is a funny pun for a man to be for the name of somebody who's writing your fake torture manual. That's just funny. So that's good. Uh, and King Rob's coming too. He's all messed up because he's like, "What's going on? I need a doctor. I can't breathe." And King Sir Miles explains that Brody's shot him and it's given him a collapsed lung. Obviously, he's got a bit of a nasty abdominal wound that's going to be getting infected, and he's lost a lot of blood. Fortunately for you, we do have a doctor on hand, Dr. Frankland. Dr. Frankland. We know what that means, don't we? We know that Frankland is the land of the Franks. We know that means Orlando. Okay, that's why this guy here, who is kind of like the doctor doing Sir Miles's uh, torture guy sidekick thing here. Uh, that's why he's called that. It's because he's Orlando, the state's power to use violence in its own maintenance and construction. Yeah. Uh, that's why he's called Dr. Franklin. I really like. Is there a better picture of him on the next page? There sort of is. He's in it a lot in the next couple of issues. This guy here, so Miles is like evil sidekick, Dr. Franklin. Um, he's a brilliant character. He's a brilliantly observed character for what like a baddie uh, is basically. He's this kind of amoral ex-hippie turned yuppie scientist who works for the government, right? Uh, he's like, yeah, he's like when the hippies turned into yuppies and uh, got into Thatcher. And the way that he's got like headphones around his neck because he's still cool, and he's still got like horrible long hippie curly hair because he's still cool, he's still with it. Just because he's a torturer for the government doesn't mean that he's not still cool. Uh, he's that. Like you don't really get characters like that anymore because they've all died out or changed. Um, but that's a character that was around at the time, like like hippies who'd sold out and become landlords, basically. Yeah. Um, and he's very entertaining. He's very good presence to have around in these next few issues. A very good. Uh, so you've got Samars is kind of like old school, uh, upper class, upper class aristocratic adjacent evil, very old school, very posh. And then you've got the kind of the nouveau riche kind of 60s counterculture hangover gone bad version here, and the kind of the alliance of these two forces. Um, of bourgeois scientism and old school patrimony and money and government. Um, the two of them working together to torture our hero. Uh, that's it. It's that like that's it. That's good. Um, and he's like, "Well, what are you doing? Don't!" And they kind of and Dr. Franklin injects him with something. And he's like, "Oh, what are you doing? Do you want? Is it money?" What I really like about this is that even though they have got him 1,000,000% bang to rights, uh, King Mob uh, is going to use every single thing that he can to uh, resist the interrogation, and that means initially and mainly uh, playing dumb. which is kind of which is what you should do. Like that's like this, like King Bob's being super smart here, and his playing dumb, even though he knows that he's playing dumb, and he knows that and he knows that Sir Miles knows that he's playing dumb too. Um, it's when you're strapped in a chair, bleeding to death, and about to be tortured. It's as aggressive a move as you can do to play dumb, even when the game is to continue to play dumb, even when the game is obviously up. You know, he's being caught, and he's going, "No, I want me, sir." He's still denying it, which is you know, it's brilliant. Like, good on him. Like, we know that King Mob's like a bit of a dickhead, basically, but like a likable one. Um, but like this is his story. The next three issues. Sir Miles is as well. Actually, Sir Miles is in it a lot, by my memory. But you definitely will like King Mob after these three issues. And one of the things you'll like about him is that he isn't having any you know, he is absolutely bang to rights here, and he is not giving an inch to this prick who's interrogating him. Fair play to the boy King Mob. Yeah, and he's like, "Oh, what do you want? Do you want money? I'll buy you off." And nice, like the art's great, obviously, really just like pacey, like simply laid out, and then this nice kind of like silhouette panel here, and then these kind of like psychedelic shadow lines, kind of like forcing their faces together and kind of like just heightening the intensity, just like as you can see, Jimenez is like a very precise artist, right? That's kind of the whole point, is that he draws very clearly the thing that he's meant to be drawing. But he's also very good at doing these sort of just stylish flourishes to enhance the storytelling. And so it is here. So with this silhouette panel and with these lines here. So that's a really nice trick, to be able to draw so precisely and yet know when it's time to just go for like a flourish. And he does it. He mixes it up very casually and very sort of effortlessly, and it's really nice. And so Miles asks, "Who is Gideon Stargrave? Is that your real name?" And he's like, "Why are you asking me that? Because I can see inside your bloody head. You can't lie to me. Don't try." So the question here that he's asked him is, "Who is Gideon Stargrave?" Now, over the page, we get another one of these weird sort of scenes, which is being held together by the same narration that we saw back on the Thames when the young girl got murdered. And it's very strange again happening here. But we're going to take a time out, and we're going to skip ahead. I don't normally do this. I don't like to do this, but we're going to skip ahead to the letters page, the invisible ink column. And this is like Grant Morrison's little intro to the letters page, and I'm just going to read it out. "I feel I must explain a little about Gideon Stargrave." He's going to tell us who Gideon Stargrave is. He's answering here the question that someone else just asked. Stargrave made his first appearance in issue 3 of the ground-level comic Near Myths in December 1978. The character, hero of a story entitled The Vatican Conspiracy, written and drawn by the teenage boy who was me at the time, was inspired by my enthusiasm for the work of J.G. Ballard and Michael Moorcock. As a thinly veiled rip-off of Moorcock's Jerry Cornelius character, Stargrave was a ruthless yet likable dandy assassin who had inadvertently sent the world hurtling towards terminal chaotic breakdown after using a defective time machine. The polysexual mod James Bond starred in one published 3-part adventure and in dozens of unpublished comics and prose stories, all of which now read exactly what they are: the bleeding cries for help of a tormented, sexually frustrated adolescent. The second version of Stargrave, with his Beatles 65 haircut and swinging London vibe, was much better in that I can still read the stuff without cringing. It goes on. That second version of Gideon Stargrave that he mentions, we'll get to in the next issue. But that's the short answer for who Gideon Stargrave is. There's more to get into here, and I don't know if I should do it now or if I should just pause. He cops to it there, as we just heard, that Gideon Stargrave is a rip-off of Michael Moorcock's Jerry Cornelius character. And indeed, so he is. Uh, and and it gets a bit weird. Like, Michael Moorcock hates Grant Morrison, and kind of one of the reasons for that enmity is the way that Gideon Stargrave who, let's be honest, was not a popular or well-known comic book character. Like Morrison didn't make any money out of it, I think. But he did obviously just rip off Michael Moorcock's ideas. In a kind of a, you could look at it one way and say it's just like shitty plagiarism, or you can look at it the other and say, well, genius steals, whereas mere talent only borrows. Moorcock wasn't happy about the way that the Gideon Stargrave character ripped off Jerry Cornelius, and has kind of hated Grant Morrison ever since. Michael Moorcock is also friends with Alan Moore, so there's a bit of a buddies thing in there that kind of, obviously Alan Moore is Grant Morrison's arch enemy, so and Michael Moorcock is Alan Moore's side, so that's another reason why he hates Grant Morrison. There's another point here, which is that Grant Morrison is like what you probably call like a bit of a fake anarchist. The fact that that Grant Morrison is an MBE gives that away, and Michael Moorcock and Alan Moore kind of aren't fake when it comes to their belief in political anarchism. So that's another reason why they don't like each other. There's a little bit of hypocrisy going on insofar as, and it mentions it here, right? So Near Myths was a comic kind of like edited and put together by the British comic book artist Brian Talbot. And Brian Talbot's like a legend for all sorts of reasons. Very, very talented artist, comic book artist, but and like an old hippie, like a real like bridge between the 60s underground comic strips, and then I should maybe have dug some out. Anyway, and then like the kind of the 80s comic books aren't for kids anymore mainstreamification of the medium, if you like. Talbot was like a kind of a very kind of key publicizer of like how comics could be cool and good while maintaining a nice kind of like patchouli scented hippie kind of sex adventure fun time ethos around it. What am I trying to say here? Okay, so the weird thing is, and Brian Talbot is pretty good mates, or at least isn't on enemy terms with Michael Moorcock, and Brian Talbot ripped off Jerry Cornelius too with his character Luther Arkwright. So there's this kind of trope, right? It's like, well, Morrison describes it well here: polysexual mod James Bond as a character type, right? Which is what Jerry Cornelius is pretty much. It's what Gideon Stargrave is, and it's what Brian Talbot's Luther Arkwright are. For some reason, Michael Moorcock took against the Gideon Stargrave character, but didn't against the Luther Arkwright character. Maybe Brian Talbot was more obvious about acknowledging his influences, or maybe he asked beforehand, maybe they were mates already. I don't know, I don't care. I already feel shitty about kind of like speculating about what these kind of old hippie dudes would beef with each other about years ago. Like, who cares? But yeah, so there's a bit of like double standardsiness there by Michael Moorcock, potentially. As far as I could kind of see, and I'm not an expert, and especially on this, and I haven't read the Jerry Cornelius books for 20 years, but part of the point of the Jerry Cornelius books is that they were there to be ripped off. There's this kind of, they're great books, really, really great books that have this kind of like radical instability built into them from the beginning. There is the whole point of them is that they're like an avant-garde exercise in like mass market popular pulp publishing that takes everything you think you know about adventure literature, low literature, mashes it with these high literature avant-garde kind of high modernist stylistic and aesthetic techniques, turns them into something very unique and difficult to read, and kind of not difficult to read, but like they're quite cleverly, deliberately alienating texts. They do push back at you quite a lot, and they are deliberately, as far as I can see, designed to have all of these instabilities and contradictions built in and amped up the whole time. Like uh, they're meant to be taking the piss out of themselves and the reader and all of the milieux that I just described. They kind of are embedded in and critiquing. They're, like I say, they're radically. I think the best word I can think of is just unstable, right? They are in the kind of the Deleuzian sense, if you like, they skits. They deliberately push against their form, their technique, their format, their readership, their authorship, like the kind of the schematic nature of why they were created versus the highly like random way in which they were created. Um, all of these contradictions are really bubbling away in there. You can see why they're so influential on the Invisbles. Uh, uh, but like, yeah, they were there to be ripped off a bit. The idea that you would kind of create like a kind of a such an unstable piece of work and then kind of like claim ownership of the idea doesn't feel right. Feels like you're trying to put a cage around something, even though it's your own thing and you do have the right to do that. To try to put a cage around this thing, which has got like an antipathy and antithesis of cagedness so clearly built into it, um, feels doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit right. I don't think. Uh, so yeah, and like other people were allowed to kind of play with the Cornelius uh, characters and story world in a kind of a Lovecraft mythos kind of way, but apparently Grant Morrison wasn't, which feels like there's an inconsistency and a bit of like unfairness there, which I don't think. Which again, who gives a shit? Like it doesn't matter. Um, but if you want to get what the Gideon Stargrave stuff is about, you should understand the Jerry Cornelius stuff. Um, I haven't decided how much detail I'm going to go into in that because, as I've said, I haven't read them for 20 years and they are slippery beasts. Yeah. Like they're really difficult to say one way or another what they are doing and what they're about because they're deliberately playing with and undercutting themselves at every single turn. Um, or at least that's my memory of them. They might not even be like that, right? They might be much less complicated than I'm piecing together from my memory. Um, what is important to note about them is that the voice, like the kind of the narrative voice that that at least the first couple of Cornelius novels that Walcott wrote is written in, is very much like the narrative sections that we get in these Gideon Stargrave sections. Like these bits here, let's read one out. The London High, this is from page 7. We're up to page 7 already, and we've been going for an hour and 20. The London Hive hums and resonates, jamming radio wave bands with high-speed digital transmissions. Deep in its Gothic honeycombed core, in a candlelit egg chamber of stained glass, the vast and immobile genetic factory thing which was once upon a time the young Queen Victoria II, releases weather fronts of ultra-pheromones, summoning her legions to swarm. That sort of like amped up, speedy, kind of self-consciously ironic voice, sardonic, I almost want to say. I don't really know what sardonic means, but I feel like it's the right word to use here. This is the voice of the time, right? Because this kind of style and its kind of glibness and its kind of like um, the way that it's kind of its reach, so the way that it kind of the way that its reach exceeds its grasp. This was the popular argot of the time, right? You can hear it in Morrison's own, like his own, in quotes, voice that he uses to frame and reply to the letters pages. uh the kind of the if you can detect a unified voice or tone of voice in the Invisibles, and I think you can, It's this. It's glib and ironic and gimmicky and self-reflexive, postmodern, obviously, and you know, and this is like Britpop voice. This is like 90s ladman voice as well. This kind of so the Cornelius novels were written from like what they were written during the long 60s, basically from what like 67 to 72, I guess, or something. When the first four kind of like canonical Jerry Cornelius novels came out. But like the Michael Moorcock verse doesn't have much truck with canon, as you already know from what I've just been saying about it. Concepts of canon aren't its thing. Uh, yeah, it was, and it's kind of this like John Lennon voice, right? There's this kind of like it's this kind of like angel-headed hipster chat that Moorcock was developing and playing with in the late 60s. And you know how I said that this mid 90s moment that this was written in was pulling from that mid to late 60s moment. I mentioned this a lot in the previous issue show. This kind of like mass appropriation by like teleculture, ad culture, uh, the entire kind of mid 90s cultural matrix had this voice to it. Everything was ironic, everything was detached, everything was smirking, and we still have traces of this voice that still exist today, obviously. But like this thing, this mode of this tone of storytelling that Moorcock innovated really for the Cornelius novels, although like they have only ever been cult novels and they're not widely known. Um, by the time you get to the 90s, everything is speaking in that voice. And it's a testament to Moorcock's genius that he was able to spot that coming and realize how, like tabloid newspapers, they all talk in this kind of stupid, hyped up, um, don't take me too seriously, I'm only pissing about, buy this, buy my fizzy pop, uh, buy my record, go and see my movie, buy my worldview uh, thing. Tone, I think is the right word. And that's why it's a good thing for Morrison to have pulled forward into the Invisibles, because there's an element, because by doing this you do have an opportunity to see it working. Yeah, like this, the Invisibles isn't unguilty of contributing to this kind of like blank and ironic and somewhat nihilistic view of the world. The Invisibles is kind of is producing the culture as much as it's critiquing or reflecting it. But the way that it identifies the Cornelius novels and the Moorcock voice as being, by the time we get to the mid 90s, the dominant mode of cultural address is really useful and clever and important, that he was able to pull this out and go, look, this is where this has come from. And kind of this is where it leads, because the whole point of the Cornelius novels is that they everything tends towards, not well, as it says in on page 1, everything tends towards disorder. The Cornelius novels, Moorcock's Cornelius novels, are all about like the death of the 60s dream, and how like the fabulousness of Carnaby Street smacks into the massacres in Vietnam and stuff. Really, like it's chaos, and it's like chaos sounds kind of fun, but it's not. It's like it's pain and wreckage. Yeah. Um, the world that we saw King Mob walk through, the desert world with the woman with the uh, deformed baby in issue 6 of the Invisibles, I want to say, I think 6. That nightmarescape is a Cornelius Moorcock one, and this glibly nihilistic tone leads to that. Yeah, And Moorcock was very aware of that. Moorcock was like a peacenik, like subverting tabloid voice, which is kind of obviously like inescapably toxic, uh, and pointing towards the fact that it creates massacres, right? By the time you get to the 90s, this is the only voice that it is permitted to talk in. And Morrison does good work here by pointing that out and being open about it, as much as he's guilty of indulging in it, right? Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. We're a minute 25. A minute 25. We're an hour 25. So yeah, and on this page we've Biggles pulls it off. So we've got this weird post-war blitz spirit, World War II hero, war movie pushed through like air bomber, blitz, London, sci-fi, insect mind, Omega bomb, so like a doomsday device. Babies in Black. Do I even know what that song is? I'll have to look that up. Yeah, all this is going on. I'm going to stop. This was the end of part 1. Join me in a week? Maybe less than that, maybe a few days. Happy Midsummer. Do surf the currents, guys. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna cut out for now, and then we're gonna come back and do some more further exploration of this issue. Yeah, in a few days or next week. Watch out for the virus. I don't care if you wear a mask or not, really. I don't think that that's worth getting in a tizzy over. You know how healthy you are and and what your responsibility is to the people around you, and you can leave it to yourself, can't you? I don't think I need to tell you the right way to do that. I don't care. Well, I don't think it's worth getting upset over. Don't think it's worth dividing ourselves over, I shall say. I think the mask thing is that. I think they look quite cool. I don't mind wearing them, but it's not worth getting in a fight about. Watch out for the virus. Watch out for rioting. We're not done yet, are we? And I don't just mean with me reading through this issue. I mean that, we've had the virus and the lockdown. We've had the pivotal political moment coming in the form of the street protests and the Black Lives Matter movement, kind of getting back its mojo and making, I think, more significant inroads. It's not over yet, though, is it? 2020. In fact, we're only just halfway. We've still got an election to come, or have we? I don't know. What would you guess? Like I say, I think there could be brutal scenes of repression as the baddies kick back in some of that contested space in America. I think that could be on the cards next. I think there could be blood on the streets. Hope not. I hope everybody stays safe and healthy. And this is my podcast about comics. It's absurd, isn't it? It's absurd, isn't it? Part 2 coming soon. Bye.